Brazilian finds show that the New World was discovered tens of thousands of years earlier than previously believed, certainly well before the time of the American Indians. But who were these pioneers? A much earlier wave of Mongoloids, or another race altogether? Clues to the identity of the first Americans are emerging in rock shelters in the northeast and southeast of Brazil. Archaeologists there have recently unearthed human remains. Prehistoric skulls were found buried in layers of soil 9 to 12,000 years old. They are the oldest skulls in the Americas. And this is the oldest of them all. The skull of a young woman nicknamed Luthia by scientists. Can she tell us who the first Americans were? Walter Neves is a physical anthropologist at Sao Paulo University in Brazil. He's been using a standard and reliable archaeological measure, the shape of the skull, to find out what race she belonged to.
91.
He fully expected Luthia to be a Mongoloid, an ancestor of the American Indians.
91.
But then he fed the measurements into the computer.
When we started running the computer and seeing the results, it was amazing because we realized that the statistics, the quantitative analysis we were doing was not showing just people to be Mongoloid. In fact, the analysis was showing just people as anything except Mongoloid.
The cast was then given to Richard Neve of the University of Manchester in England, one of the world's leading forensic artists, to recreate her features.
That, to me, is a Negroid face that has all the features that you associate with a Negroid face. The proportions of the face, it doesn't say anything about it being a Mongoloid.
Face of a first American.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you may be in this beautiful world of ours. We are thankful that you're here at Dark Matter Radio. We thank you for also supporting Dark Matter Radio on YouTube as A New Thunder and Alive. Go there. Also go to iamindigenous.org and support the channel there as well. There's a lot of great information there. Tonight, we are going to be talking about something that's going to be very interesting indeed. Subjects and topics that I brought up before. And we're going to be getting into the African American chromosome here in the United States. Of course, as you know, this channel brings up all different types of subject matters. And one of the subject matters we did bring up, we're not going to get into too much detail of it today, but is of the O negative, O positive, and all the different blood types, which goes very much into a lot of the things that we're talking about tonight. It is a subject that the headline says that the African American chromosome study upsets the known evolution timeline. That is big news. Now, you haven't really heard this really anywhere else. There are certain things on the internet that might even touch this a little bit, but we're going to go into it a little bit deeper tonight and get into what it actually really means, because it really does mean something that the African American is extremely misnamed And also it is very much misconstrued and a mind game that is going on with the world. It is very interesting that we find ourselves in this day and age still upholding certain belief systems that are just not true and outright lie. And with this study we're going to get into, it came up because what happened is that they were trying to figure out why or who on this earth is not purely human, right? And I consider them to be extremely, this was an extremely racist genetic profiling that was going on to try to prove that Africans, and again, they are assuming that everyone in this John Des, they already know they're probably not, is from Africa. And they're trying to prove that the Africans also slept with animals and became non-humans or been infected with non-human antigens. So in order for them to do that, they had to begin to start testing the Y chromosomes and the DNA of quote-unquote black people all across the earth. Now, the reason why this came up is because they had this big giant thing about the Neanderthals, which there's nothing wrong with it, but 90% of the Caucasoid race, Caucasian race, whether you, and that goes into Middle Eastern, Asian, East Asian, goes into the Asiatic people, goes into all the different European type nations, including the Mongoloids that are over here in North America, all have anywhere between 2 to 9% DNA from Neanderthals. Now, I did a show on the Neanderthals. You got to take a look at that one. It's very interesting on what the real Neanderthals are, what they look like, and who they actually were. And then also, so it came down that, you know, that there relatively 0% of the quote-unquote black race, African race, and people here over here in America have pretty much 0% of Neanderthal inside of the system as well. So tonight we're going to take a look at that, and this is the reason why they came out with this study to prove that the Africanized Negroid race on this planet is not pure Homo sapien, and that they're also mixed in divisions of other characteristics that they may have slept with back in time. So here it is, the truth that they really don't want you to know about the quote-unquote black people, African American people here in the United States, and why their Y chromosome has changed and upset the known evolutionary timeline. There's been an awakening. Have you felt it? You are listening to Dark Matter Radio with your host, Ronnie. Again, welcome. This is Dark Matter Radio with your host, Ronnie McQueen. And tonight we are talking about the African American Y genome and how it upsets the evolutionary timeline and sparks a shift in the evolutionary timeline as well, which means a lot of scientists and a lot of geneticists very shocked, very surprised. But again, I have to go back and let you know how this all really came about. How this came about. This testing of African Americans. Well, the beginning, as I was talking about earlier, it was to prove that the Africans, from from Africa, all Africans, are not pure Homo sapiens. Because as they know, the Caucasoid race, as they call themselves, or the Caucasians, anyone from Europe, East Asia, the Middle East, India, China, Asia Minor, all those areas over there, and a lot of the people on the islands over there near Australia, etc., are mixed, have anywhere between an admixture of anywhere from 3 to 9% of Neanderthal, and that also includes the quote-unquote Native American population, which again, they are also from across the pond from Mongols, right? So what they're trying to prove is that the Africans, there are no pure Homo sapiens on the earth. As you know, that almost 99% of all carbon-based beings have no Neanderthals with them whatsoever. But they're saying that there's other things that may have been mixed into their genome that may not be Neanderthals, or may be other types of animal DNA that's mixed in there, and that's the reason why they began to start testing. Now, the reason why they really don't test the African Americans is because over here on this side of the pond, what they've done to the original indigenous beings is that they killed most of them all off, right? They killed a lot of them off. So in the war here, when they first got here, what they did over a period of time, over 100 million beings were slaughtered, killed, and destroyed off the face of the earth. And again, I get into a lot of these on some of the other programs that we do. So take a listen to some of those. You know, was the slave trade for real? Don't ever call yourself black, and all this other type stuff, right? So one of the things the world has to know is that a lot of these testings and a lot of these things that are coming out dealing with the Y chromosome was done so that they can prove that none of us are pure Homo sapiens. So in doing this, they began to start doing something they haven't done before, which was testing, quote unquote, the African American, quote unquote, black person of North America, right? And they had pretty much stayed clear of testing any of our real DNA, right? So a lot of the DNA testing that you're getting, you know, all that family DNA, all those DNA tests that people are getting and stuff like that, all falsified. And the reason why it's all falsified, you can't trust them, you can't believe in anything that they're saying, is because they don't have any of the real original indigenous beings' DNA that they can go by in order for them to judge you off of that. And the majority of the DNA that is over here, that is considered to be Indian, you know, all those, you know, Native Americans, whatever the situation is a lot of it is European based because of what they did with the DOS rolls. And again, I had a story I talked about the DOS rolls and how they converted a lot of the indigenous beings here into white names and all that, or white beings and all that other type stuff, Caucasians, whatever, how they assumed the identities of other people. And then the Mongolians, the natives that they have here, are not associated with the original indigenous beings that were first here on the land because they have a totally different DNA set. So when they say that you're not an Indian or that you're not Native American or anything like that, they're telling you the truth because you're not associated with that group of people. You're associated with the original indigenous beings, which they are not testing you for. And all the DNA tests and stuff like that that they do around the earth is based off only just a few, maybe even just one person that they actually based all the other DNA off of, and I believe that was around 1980 when they began to start breaking down the DNA, and I believe that they completed it around 2000, 2001. So when you begin to start talking about a lot of these things, you begin to start talking about why did they hide a lot of the truth. But when they came down to it, you know, it really shocked him because he had this all out of Africa theory. Now there's out of Africa theory stuff. I want to get into that just a little bit before we get to this Y chromosome, because I want to really make sure that you understand where all this stuff is coming from. The Out-of-Africa hypothesis is an evolutionary theory of modern human origin that pushes the modern human arose in the late Palestine about 100 to 200,000 years ago. Now I want you to notice these dates that I'm giving you, because these dates are going to be extremely important. 100, 2,000 years ago, they think that all modern humans actually began to start facilitating themselves in Africa. There's a different versions of the Out-of-Africa theory, but its major tenet is that modern humans originated in a discrete population of species that rapidly expanded and replaced archaic humans that were indigenous to other parts of the world. Homo erectus, social science and law and anthropology, and other beings as well, right? So so we have it placed Homo erectus in the human evolution, Homo erectus for its descendants. In East Asia, South Asia, we have the Neanderthals in Europe, and most common version of out-of-Africa modern humans considered a new species with negligible gene flow, mating between the migrant African people and the indigenous people. Now they say migrants, because when they say migrants, that means the people outside of Africa began to start mating with all of these other different types of animal type creatures and started having babies with them. Now, it's important to understand that this out-of-Africa theory states that everybody, no matter who you are, is African. Right? No matter who you are as African, and the divergence is because of environmental. Right? It takes about 30,000 years for you to lose your skin color, and people began to start adjusting into the places that there are. All right. So a lot of this out of Africa stuff goes into basically, we're all Africans. Everybody's out of Africa, right? That every population, a unique ancestor is living humans, and they came out of Africa. So that's basically the out of Africa theory, right? Now there have been groups who are deadhead set against this out of Africa theory, and they try to debunk it all the time. So the scientific evidence refuting the theory of modern humans is African geneticists is common knowledge among those familiar with the most recent scientific papers of human genome. Mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosomes, regrettably, within mainstream press and academia circles, there seems to be a conscious, and dare we say it, deliberate vacuum when it comes to the reporting news of these recent studies and their obvious implications. Now, a lot of this is coming from Red Ice, and it's a Red Ice radio program that I believe is out of Europe. And it goes on to say that the Australian historian Greg Jeffries explains that the whole out of Africa myth, as it has its roots in the mainstream academic campaign in the 90s to remove the concept of race. When I did, he says, when he did his degree, they all spent a lot of time on the out of Africa, that things, and it's completely disproved by genetics, mainstream. Still hold on to it. So the fraudulent story, as they claim, it did begin in the early 90s, and the academic most responsible for cementing both out of Africa theory and the completely common ancestral African mother, given the name of Eve, in the public arena and nearly every curriculum, were Professor Alan C. Wilson and Rebecca L. Cann. In their defense, the authors of the paper were fully aware that the genealogy is not in any way linked to geography, and that their placement of Eve in Africa was an assumption, never an assertion. So a lot of these things that we're looking at was, there are no real proofs They're just trying to follow a timeline and put things together the way it seems to fit nicely for them and their ideology. Right? The paper goes on to say a very recent paper on the Y chromosome published in 2012, re-examining the out-of-Africa theory and the origins of Europoids, Caucasians, in the light of DNA genealogy, written by Antho A. Kozvolf and Igor L. Roskonsky, only confirms the denial of any African ancestry in non-Africans and strongly supports the existence of common ancestor who would not necessarily be in Africa. In fact, it was never proven that he lived in Africa at all. The central to results of the extensive examination of the haplogroups group 7556 was the absence of any African genes whatsoever. So lacking was the sample of African genetic involvement. The researchers stated that their introduction, that the findings that the Europoids, holographic groups, did not descend from Africa, holographic group A or B, is supported by the fact that bears, the Europoids, as well as all non-African groups, do not carry either SNI, MG1, page 7, M31, page 82, and M23, M114, right? Well, with the holographic groups not present in any African gene, and in absence of the dozens of African genetic markers, it is very difficult, nigh on impossible, to sustain any link to Africa. The researchers are adamant that their extensive study offers evidence to re-examine the validity of the out-of-Africa concept. And this is why, you know, they began to start studying who's actually human, who's not, who's actually a pure Homo sapien, who's not a pure Homo sapien, because they're starting to realize that there are some gaps in these genetic findings, right? They see no genetic proof substantiating an African presence in the Homo sapien tree, and maintains that more, did you hear that? They see no genetic proof sustaining an African presence in the Homo sapien tree. In other words, you know, either the African Americans or Africans or people of carbon-based beings are not present in the tree upon which they belong to. When I say they, the Europoids, the Asiatic people, right? So they don't see that. A more plausible interpretation might have been that both current Africans and non-Africans descended separately from a more ancient common ancestor, thus forming a pivotal fork. Right? So they're still trying to make sure that the two groups are connected in somehow. And we're gonna get into that, but this is actually debunking the out of Africa theory. Right? We're going to get into the ancient alien theory and what they believe, and then we'll get into some of the other theories, what's going on and why it's so important, right, about the African American Y chromosome and how old it is. So they say they regard the claim a more plausible explanation as a gross understatement, since there is absolutely nothing plausibly African turning up in any test tubes. In fact, the researchers made note their repeated absence, stating not one non-African participant out of more than 400 individuals in the project tested positive for any 13 African subcascades of holographic group A. The only remaining uncertainty relates to the identity of this more ancient common ancestor, whatever that is. We'll get into that missing link pretty soon as well. All that can be stated with confidence is that humanity's ancestor did not reside in Africa. Now, when they say humanity's ancestors, that doesn't mean that the carbon-based beings are a part of that group, meaning that, you know, whether or not they came from Africa or not. But this is going to show that what they're saying is that not all quote-unquote people came from Africa. So the unfounded accusations of racism have become common as a prevailing Afrocentric hypothesis is consistently being challenged by the growing mountain of conflicting science evidence, especially in the evolving field of genetics. That's why the African American, the Black American, the original beings from North America, this geno test is extremely important. It is now scientifically refutable that the fact that the human species has been found to contain a substantial quantity of DNA, at least 20%, from other humanoid populations not classified as Homo sapiens, such as Neanderthals, divinations, African-centric, Homo erectus, and now possibly even Hobbit, Homo fluorescens. So they did find, so all around the earth, Australia, a lot of different places, they're finding a lot of these different bones and testing the DNA, and they're coming up with a lot of different types of humanoids. And one of them was very short, which they deemed it to be the hobbits. And one of the things that they were trying to test for the Africans were the divinations, which they thought that they were the ones that were infecting the Homo sapiens of quote-unquote people on the land of Africa. And that's what they were actually testing for. So, you know, with this article here, coming from Red Ice TV, the future is the past, goes on to explain all of those things that the out of Africa theory is or is not. So one of the things we're starting to have an understanding that not everything came out of Africa, right? So when we look at the evolutionary scale and how evolutionary, the missing link, and all that other type of stuff, we look at Charles Darwin. Now, Charles Darwin came into effect around the 1880s, and he himself really didn't believe too much in it, but he was forced by the church to commit to it, and a few other places commit to it. So it's more of a political type situation. But and Charles Darwin's theory, the theory of evolution, making this very short, there's a missing link. Right? So they can't link. They say that we all came from some sort of monkey, some sort of ape, whatever, but they cannot find the missing link to link us to these ape-like people. So when you begin to start really thinking about it, all right, you start looking at how the ancient alien theories, how they believe in all that. And in short, how they think is that a large part of the population was seeded here by aliens, created genetically. And a lot of these pockets were all over the world, in many different countries. And this is one of the reasons why you're finding all these different attempts to make humanity in a lot of these different labs all across the world. You're finding these bones. And these bones are representations of either their failed attempts or whatever attempts they were trying to make different types of humanoid beings. And then it came down to where they made the human race or mankind type race. Because men means, people of color, right? There's a color. So the other thing, so that's the ancient aliens, right? The other things that you have to get with the Christians and a lot of religious people, they feel that life for a certain group of people did not start until about 6,000 years ago. This is the reason why a lot of their books only go back but so far. So at some point, for, certain races or whatever, they say that the Caucasian race, the people with white skin, did not originate on this earth until about 6,000 years ago. 8,000 years ago. Anything past that was carbon-based beings that were on this earth, right? And then the people with white skins or the Caucasoids, whatever they call them, whatever the scientists want to call them, they suddenly appeared actually out of nowhere about 6,000 years ago. And that's where a lot of their history begins to start. So this is why we get into this, right? As they began to start trying to find out exactly who comes from where and all these different polygenetic trees, as they're doing it, they came into a shock. And that shock was that the African Americans, the black people here in the United States, and despite all of your genetic testing, this chromosome test was done by a very, very, very well-known group, and it was published in the American Journal of Human Genetics, right, March 7th, 2013. Right? So I just want to see when the first reports of this stuff actually came out. So I just wanted to check out the dates here, and the dates is, so this report we received December 3rd, 2012, and it was revised February 1st, 2013, and then it was accepted after the revision at February 6th, 2013, and it was finally published February 28th, 2013. And so the African American chromosome study upsets the evolutionary timescale. Scientists say the African American male's odd genetic signatures suggest that the Y chromosome, the human Y chromosome lineage, goes back further in time than they thought, perhaps due to interbreeding with other populations such as Neanderthals. Now we're going to get into that a little bit later, but they're always trying to throw something else in there, but we're going to get into that a little bit later about this interbreeding stuff. This really upsets a lot of ideas, but at the timeline, it's understandable that if we accept the human populations were structured in the past so that there were little pockets of diversity, Michael Hammer said, an evolutionary biologist at the University of Arizona, who is one of the authors of the study in the American Journal of Human Genetics. So the study forces the analysis of the DNA sample that was obtained from African Americans living in South Carolina at the time. Now this African American, Black American, original business being from what we now call the Americas, was living in South Carolina at the time, and submitted to the Genetic Project, the National Geographic effort aimed at mapping human origins and migrations, which its true purpose was to try to find out, to make sure that the Africans, was to prove that the African population, the so-called African populations, were not pure Homo sapiens at all, but mixed with divisions, right, or other animal-type DNA. Right, as we got into before, where they were found not to be mixed with any Neanderthals whatsoever. So the funny thing about this sample is that it didn't match up to any previous known genetics signatures of Y chromosomes, which is passed down from father to son. That's very interesting, that they said that this Y chromosome did not match any of the other genetic signatures. Why do I say that's funny? Because there's millions and millions of people that are having their DNA tested every single year, right? Especially so-called African Americans, to find out exactly where they're from. And a lot of these tests are coming back telling you that you got some ancestry over there in Ireland, or you got some people over there in France and Italian and all this other type of stuff. 96, 98% African. You're from the Congo. In a lot of these other different places. And I find it very hard to believe that after almost 10 years of constant studying and constant putting out all these DNA tests of millions of African Americans, millions of people from all over North America, that they never once came up with this genetic anomaly. Which only tells me, as I had some shows on there dealing with DNA, that these DNA tests that they're putting out there is false, right? When they're telling you that you're part Cherokee or you're part this, that, and the other thing, there's absolutely no way in the world that they can tell any original business being, so-called African American black person here in North America, at least, that you're from any of these populations, because the population upon which you actually really came from, they killed off a lot of people, over 100 million people, and they have no genetic markers, or they're not using those genetic markers in order for them to base your pairings with. So they can't tell you where you're from. And the genome that they're actually using was a base genome that was created back in the 80s for them to be able to break down the whole entire genetic marker of the human species. And as they completed that back in 2000, this is what they always usually go back to. So it's this very small sample upon which they're basing these DNA tests on. But I found it very difficult to believe that they never once came up with this Y chromosome anomaly passed down from father to son with all the DNA testing that they're doing all around the world. And then they said that nobody expected to find anything like this. Nobody, Hammer said in a news release. A team led by Fernando Mendez, a researcher in Hammer's lab, analyzed more than 240,000 DNA-based pairs of so-called African Americans' Y chromosomes. A comparison of the differences between the mystery genetic signature and previous known signatures led the team to conclude that most of the recent common ancestors of the entire African American group here in North America their ancestors lived more than 337,000 years ago. Now that's very interesting. And why is that interesting? Because that tells you why it actually shook up the whole entire evolutionary timeline. Because as you're going to find that this Y chromosome, this anomaly that they found, goes back further than any other human Y chromosome pairing ever. And as I said, that this goes back further than the fossil records goes for autonomically modern humans, said Hammer. The fossil record speaks only to 195,000 to 200,000 years ago. The researchers followed up their discovery by searching through genetic databases of African populations. Now they've tested African populations all over Africa. And this is what they came up with. It turned up 11 men, only 11 men, from an interesting place called Western Cameroon, who had virtually the same genetic signatures, which tells me that they all came from the same place. So the majority of people that they tested, over 240,000 base pairs of DNA sequences of Y chromosomes here in North America, they found that 11 men in Cameroon, Western Cameroon, turned up with the exact same genetic pairing, which tells me that the people are from the same place. And I will go where the majority is, and the majority is here in North America. Now, as we all know, as we began to start studying a lot of the slave trade and what happened with the slave trade, we know that when they came over here and they started conquering, killing, and slaughtering the people that were over here, they took a lot of the carbon-based beings back to Europe and sent them into Africa as well. And that's why a lot of people considered the slave trade and what they told about the slave trade that it actually happened in reverse. Our genetic differences with the rest of the pairings anywhere is over 338,000 years older than the nearest atomically modern human. So Hammer said there could be two explanations for the previously unidentified Y chromosome type. And again, I find this hard to believe that it's been unidentified for this whole entire time. It's because they haven't really been testing the DNA of people in the way that they said that they've been testing them. Millions of African Americans have been relying on DNA tests from all these different DNA companies to tell them, quote unquote, the truth of where they're from, and not one has come up with anything such as this, which tells me that these DNA tests are fraudulent. All of them, fraudulent. Now they say that either the group Heritage Anatomically Correct Humans really goes back much, much further than what's reflected in the fossil record, or other populations such as Neanderthals or more recently identified Denisovans interbred with modern humans. Anthropologists refer to that pattern as divergence, followed by the reviewing, breeding, interbreeding of intergestion. Now they had to bring that in there because there's no other way to explain how and why and how far back that goes. Now I have to add this in there, that as they're testing all these different populations, they found not one of these African Americans, so-called black people, the original indigenous beings of North America, has been infected by any other outside DNA other than the DNA that they hold into them. They already know that there's absolutely no Neanderthal in them whatsoever. And now they know that there isn't anything else that's attached to them as well. The other thing I need to bring up, again, we brought up the blood, but I'm going to have to bring on some other people, such as Young Farrell, and probably get back on Newman and Carres to speak on this a little bit more. But the blood research that they have done came up with that they know that 100% of indigenous beings here in North America had O negative blood, which means that, and this is before the Europeans came over. This is before the Europeans came over and our blood was infected. But it was O negative. There was no O positives here. Now, the reason why the O positives started showing up was because there were certain antigens as the races began to mix, forcefully mix in a lot of cases, rapes and a whole bunch of other things, and we went into those things as well, started developing an antigen that was trying to combat a lot of the other blood-borne illnesses or diseases or infections or whatever there is from outside origins from North America. And this is the reason why you develop positive, because then it becomes an antigen that's in there to combat whatever is going on inside the blood. And again, we'll have, I'll try to see if I can get Young Farrow on here. He does a lot of good videos on that. Check him out. And also Newman and Carres. He does a lot of videos on that one as well. I don't want to get too deep into that. The main thing is that they know that the Y chromosome of the so-called African American, of the so-called original black person here in America, is different than any other Y chromosome on human on Earth from over more than 330,000 years, and that's in their language. So the results are more consistent with the introgression of an odd lineage, Hammer told NBC News. Over the past few years, scientists have been coming around to the view that such interbreeding did take place early in the history of our species. When they say our species, it means their species, or the species of the Caucasians and the Asians, Indians, etc., right? East Indians and all that other type stuff, right? Recent analysis of Neanderthal and Denisovans' DNA has indicated that a part of their genetic heritage survives in modern day times. Now, they found some of this stuff in Africa. They found some of these genetic anomalies in Africa, but they did not find any of these genetic anomalies so far in any of the African American people. And this is the reason why this becomes so damn important in terms of understanding who and what you are as a being of people on the face of this earth, and understanding that no, you cannot trust the science or the genetics or anything that's going on with the medical industry concerning yourself and who you are. Why is this important? It's important because if you are seeking a certain medical treatment from the pharmaceuticals, you got to understand that a lot of these pharmaceuticals are not suited for your genome, not suited for your blood type. It's important for you to have an understanding about that. So again, it's not about race. It's about understanding who and what you are as a person and how to be able to best take care of you. I mean, I find it very interesting that 1 in 3 kids or something like that is going to end up with cancer, and a lot of them are going to die from that, and also people, right? Coming from a place where there were no sicknesses whatsoever in this side of the on this side of the pond whatsoever. So I want you to listen to the actual guy that did some of the research, and what he's about to start breaking down when you start hearing it is how they began to start breaking down the stuff in Africa, and how they began to start understanding how these different lineages started coming together, and then how they say they have to put together another polygenic tree, add one for the African Americans specifically, because they have absolutely no ties to anyone else on this tree. They are separate and apart from everywhere else, and they don't even know where they came from. They don't know, they have no clue as to where the quote-unquote African-American people came from, but they do know that they're the oldest quote-unquote race of people on the face of the earth, living here in North America. These are the people whom they found when they first came here. These were the original people that were in control of all of the land in the Americas. These were carbon-based beings, and these are the people whom they first began to start dealing with. And you need to have an understanding of what your past is, what your real past is, so then that way you can attach yourself to the right things and have an understanding of who and what you are as people. And for the rest of the people around the world, have an understanding of who and what you are as well, and who we are, who the people here in the Americas are. Not trying to take over anybody else's history, but trying to make sure that history is being explained in the proper contents. So then that way we all can get back to who and what we are and begin to start living a real life other than what we're living in this system right now. Because they are lying to all of us. But I want you to take a listen to this tape. Listen to this breakdown here of what they came across in Africa, and then the breakdown of what they found about the so-called African American Y gene.
Likelihood approach, we were able to make inferences about the model that involved introgression. In particular, contemporary African populations seem to contain about 2% contribution of genetic material from an archaic form that introgressed approximately 35 to 40,000 years ago from a group that split perhaps as long ago as 700,000 years. And given the distribution of these different fragments, we suggested that the interbreeding may have been centered somewhere in Central Africa. Now, I just want to digress for 1 second here about a very interesting story that came up this year that involved the Y chromosome, and that is the discovery of a very rare and ancient Y chromosome that didn't fit into the known picture of Y chromosome diversity. Many, many years of research on the Y chromosome told us it was very much like mitochondrial DNA. All the Y chromosome variation today traced back to a very recent single ancestor that lived in Africa about 100 to 140,000 years ago. This was the picture that we had at the time, and it made a lot of sense because the most divergent lineages on the Y tree were found in hunter-gatherer populations like the Khoisan and the Pygmies, which was very similar to autosomal patterns. Well, this particular lineage was discovered in an African-American man from South Carolina who happened to submit this DNA to the National Geographic Genographic Project, which sees thousands and thousands of samples, was very unusual, did not fit on the tree. Well, so just to update where we stand today, now we have to add another admixture process in Africa, along with the two outside of Africa.
So now what you just heard was was one of the directors of the project itself explaining the breakdown as to what they found and how they had to actually begin to start developing a new genographic tree for the actual African American that goes back, that Y chromosome that goes back 338,000 years, or KYA as they put it. So the furthest back that they went is actually 202,000, and this goes back over 100,000 years more than what they actually figured, right, from the report that they got. So as they actually really reported it, You had the scientists Fernando L. Mendez, Thomas Kern, Bonnie Schrack, Astrid Maria Kron, Christina R. Valhalma, August E. Wormer, Falker Lapre, Matthew Fournier, Neil Bradman, Mark G. Thomas, Tatiana M. Carfet, and Michael E. Hammond. These are the people that actually began to start doing that study. And as they said, we reported the discovery of the African American Y chromosome that carries an ancestral state of SNP that define the base portions of the Y chromosome polyhaptic tree. We sequenced 240 kb of this chromosome and identified private derived mutations on the lineage, which was named A00. So they named it A00 because there was nothing like this before. It doesn't identify with anything else. Then they went on to say, we then estimated the time to the most recent common ancestor, TMRCA, for the Y tree as far back as 338,000 years ago. 95% confident in retrieval, right? Remarkably, this exceeds current estimates of the DNA TMRCA as well as those of the age of the oldest autonomically modern human fossils. The extremely ancient age combined with the rarity of the A00 lineage, which was also found on a very low frequency in Central Africa. Those were the 11 people we were talking about in Cameroon. Pointed the importance of considering more complex models for the origin of the Y chromosome diversity. The models include ancient population structure and the possibility of erratic introduction of the Y chromosomes in autonomically modern humans. The A00 lineage, which is what we are here in the African Americans, a whole new line, was discovered in a large database of consumer samples of quote-unquote African Americans and has not been identified as traditional hunter-gatherer populations from the sub-Saharan Africa, which means that they're not from Africa. They didn't identify them from Africa. And want to go on to say that they also stated that we, the scientists that I named, genofied a set of 6 Y chromosomes, short tandem repeats, YSTRs, DYS19, DYS388, DYS390, DYS391, DYS392, and DYS393, and found that the A00 chromosome carried the following allies: 6, 11, 19, 10, 12, 13, upon searching a large Pan-African database consisting of 5,640 samples from 10 countries: Cameroon, Nigeria, Ghana, Senegal, Uganda, Tanzania, Malawi, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and South Sudan. We identified 11 Y chromosomes that were invariant and identical to the A00 chromosome in 5 of those pairings. The 2 of the 11 chromosomes carried DSY19.6, whereas the others carried DYS19-5. These 11 chromosomes were all found in the sample of 147, 6.3%, MOB individuals from Western Cameroon. So I'm trying to give you a little bit more of a breakdown as to what they found, where they found, and how they found these people, and where they're actually at, right? And how rare it is in all of Africa, because they studied and searched the large Pan-African database, and now all these Pan-Africans that are listening, you're going to say, we're this, that, and the other thing, but then there's nothing against Pan-Africa, but they studied Cameroon, Nigeria, Ghana, Senegal, Uganda, Tanzania, Malawi, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, including South Sudan, and maybe others that aren't identified here, but they didn't find anybody. except for 11 people over there in Cameroon that had some of the same base pairings, right? Identical, which tells me that they may not even be part of the Cameroon area. But it's always interesting on how Cameroon comes up as part of the base pairings for, or some sort of a significance dealing with the now what we call the Americas, right? So these genotypes were found to be identical in 37 and 39 SPS known to derive from the AOO chromosome. Two of these genotypes, S and PS, were ancestral in the MBO samples, tables S1, using a joint likelihood for the split of the two, right? So lineages and the sublineages international to one of them. So what they're trying to say is that you know, they're trying to figure out where this AOO came from, and they can't really track it down to really anywhere directly in Africa that they're actually situated. So they went on to say, also estimated that level of variation among 9 A00 lineage, including the additional MBO individual, by using a battery of 95 STRS, for which all individuals had no missing data. Table 2. The median joining network shows that the African American AOO lineage is 11 multinational steps from the nearest MBO, and the maximum difference between the pairing of MBO is 9 steps. Figures 3 and table S2, right? So this is the graph that they have, and I'll show that up on the board. It's probably what you're looking at now. So what they're saying is that we are 11 steps away from the nearest humans that mutated on this chart. So they have to develop a whole entire new line, evolutionary line, for the people here in North America, for the original indigenous beings, carbon-based beings, so-called African-American black people here in America. They have to develop a whole new line on the evolutionary chart just for us, right? Just for us, all right? The late second divergence time estimated at 564, 2,697 years ago, right? So in contrast to the estimates, all previous studies, our estimate of the Y chromosome, TMRCA, predates both that of the known mtDNA lineage and of the likely time of the origin of the AMH on the basis of current fossil evidence. Also, we identified the AOO lineage and the African American, the unusual YSR profile associated with individuals' Y chromosomes allowed us to identify the same divergent lineage in a single ethnic group living in a small region in Western Cameroon. So they're trying their best to do everything that they can to link 11 people, to over hundreds of millions of people that were living here in North America at the time to Africa. They're trying to use 11 people to link over 100 million to Africa. They can't find anything else other than these 11 people. And again, like I stated, they had a lot of reverse slavery that was going on, slave trade that was going on, where they took a lot of our people back over to Europe, just so that they can parade them around and see them, and then they took them over into Africa, which in turn they also landed on slave ships and came back here. So we're finding some very interesting things, right? This interesting contrary between the previous Y chromosomes and the mtDNA studies. They did not only identify the most basal lineage in the traditional hunter-gatherer population, such as the Khoisan and Pygmies, rather like the majority of the groups that now occupy sub-Saharan Africa. The MOB are a Bantu-speaking population, given the largest ancestry expected in the genealogical process on the single locus. We should not be surprised that the Y chromosome genealogy does not match the current accepted polarity of the human population on the basis of genome-wide data, which shows that the earliest divergence events evolved in ancestors of extent traditional hunter-gatherers, given what we know about the coalescent process. The lack of dense sampling of sub-Saharan Africa, especially compared with Europe, has most likely contributed to the failures to identify more cases of intergressions between genealogical and population divergence. The large sample size of the African American was critical for the discovery of the A00 lineage, given its very low frequency estimate in sub-Saharan Africa. 0.19, 95% C equals, well, then they give a very low number. However, even this large consumer-based African American data set examined here highly biased representation of sub-Saharan Africa because let's see what it has to say, because it captures only genetic diversity inherent from ancestors living in a particular time and place. So they're trying very hard to figure out where this is actually coming from. They're trying to use their scientific minds to come up with some sort of an explanation as to why they can't find this anywhere in Africa. Anywhere where supposedly the largest of the slave trades came, they can't find any of the so-called African American DNA in any of these places. The new line on the evolutionary chart, A00, which is not connected to any other human existence on the chart. They can't figure it out. Can't figure it out, right? I mean, they tested almost all of the countries over there in Africa, and I'm sure they did. I'm sure they really went over this stuff completely. So they say, although the scholastic nature of right? You know, they can't get by the facts that are given to them. So they say, although the scholastic nature of the evolutionary process can explain after mention in conjurance, meaning that there might be a possibility that there are other animal species that have been connected to the African Americans. Process can explain, right? The extreme age and rarity of the A00 lineage point to the possibility of a high-structured ancestral population consistent with recent work on the autosomes. This could take the form of a long-lasting population structure from AMH populations and eric intergressions from the ACREC into the ancestors of AMH. What they're trying to tell you is that perhaps maybe there is a reason why the African American so-called black people, indigenous beings of North America, has such an old Y chromosome. They can't explain it. They don't know where it came from. They don't know why it's coming from where it's coming from. And they're trying to figure out, they're trying to put all these things in into trying to figure out why the African American in the Americas has no link to any other human history. Then they say, finally, the diversity of the A00 lineage demonstrates the power of public perception in the scientific process, a venture that is likely to continue in the current era of personal genomes. So they say, we thank Jacqueline Johnson and her male cousin, descendants of Albert Perry, South Carolina. So the African Americans from South Carolina and the rest of them, and so many of the other ones that have actually took place in this report. So there you have it. I mean, right there, it's a secret that the scientific community doesn't really want to discuss because you're not hearing this anywhere. Not hearing anywhere. Nobody's talking about it. I mean, anytime when something comes up saying that it's changed the evolutionary process and the way that people think about evolution, and they have to create another branch on the tree. They have to, not the tree itself, but a whole nother line of where these people actually came from. Tells you everything you need to know about your scientific community, and you have to say, why aren't they talking about this? How come more research hasn't come out? So as you're going about your daily lives, I want you really to think about all the things that are going on in your scientific community. I want you to stay awake, keep on listening, right? Keep on researching, and don't accept anything for granted, right? Not even what I'm saying here. Research, research, research. And the only thing that I gave out to you today is all of the facts and all of the studyings, including their own words, all their own words, of what they had discovered about the African American Y genome and why it has changed the evolutionary process and the scale and the way that the geneticists think about how humans were developed on the face of this earth. So, where do the African Americans actually really come from? I can't truly say. I can only say what they tell us. The African Americans have their own line of descendants on the evolutionary scale. And the only name that they come up with them is A00. Not from Africa. Not from Africa. And at this point, they're trying to tell you they don't know where they came from, although the majority of them, and that they tested, are right here in North America. This is Ronnie McLean for Dark Matter Radio. And please subscribe to our new Thunder, Inna, and support all Indigenous radio, no matter where it may be. We thank you. Have a great day. And no matter what, no matter where you may be, no matter what's going on in your life, remember, if you're going through something, you're going through it. So smile. Don't forget to smile, because it won't last forever. For you are the positive forces upon which the earth is depending on for us all to rise and to move forward. Great Grand Rising, everyone. Take care. This is Ronnie McLean for Dark Matter Radio.